You're live at the BBC Sports Centre with me, Chris Mitchell, coming up for you on Sportsday. Backlash as the World Anti-Doping Agency reinstate Russia after their 3-year ban. Trying times for the face of English rugby as Danny Cipriani is left out of the latest national squad. And go Greece Lightning! Chelsea get an early goal in tonight's Europa League. Russia are back in the game. Our sports editor joining us tonight on Sports Day. The World Anti-Doping Agency voted today to lift the suspension of Russia's anti-doping agency. It ends their 3-year suspension, which followed a major doping scandal. Leading athletes and anti-doping bodies had opposed the move, but at an executive meeting in the Seychelles earlier today, Wada decided Russia would be reinstated. Dan Rowan, our sports editor, has been following this story for us for years now, quite literally. Were you surprised by what happened today?
I wasn't surprised, Chris. It was coming, quite frankly. Ever since the Compliance Review Committee of WADA last week recommended that its executive committee take this decision, it's been on the cards. Having said that, it's still, I think, unquestionably the most divisive and controversial decision that WADA's made in its 19-year history, because it's in defiance of an unprecedented outcry by athletes in the West and also senior figures within the anti-doping community, UKAD, USADA, UK Sport as well, all of whom were asking for, at the very least, a postponement of this decision. The reason for that is, I think, twofold. One, the scale of the crime that Russia was originally accused of. Remember, they were found to have subverted the entire anti-doping system. This was a remarkable doping conspiracy, state-sponsored, allegedly, went to the very top, across 30 sports, 1,000 athletes involved, sabotaging events as big as the London 2012 Games and Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics as well. And yet here they are, as a result of this decision, back in the fold. It's effectively representative of a readmission of Russia to international sport. They can now retest athletes themselves. They can apply for TUEs themselves. They can bid for major sports events. Their track and field team and Paralympic team will soon be back to full strength and competing under their national flag. The second reason is how this was done. We revealed in the last few days, not once but twice, attempts to compromise by senior leaders at WADA with the Russians over 2 key criteria. And I think it's that which has sparked such uproar among many athletes. Let's, before we move on, take a look back, just to remind ourselves of how we got to this situation. This is reaction to Russia's reinstatement by WADA from Travis Tygart, who we're going to be hearing from in just a moment. We're just queuing him up as we speak. Today marked the biggest decision in WADA's history, he says, and it delivered a devastating blow to the world's clean athletes. More on that in a minute. Given that there's such opposition to this, how has it come to pass? Well, because WADA wanted Russia back. I mean, Russia are a very powerful sporting nation, as you know, Chris. They host an awful lot of sport. Politically, they're very powerful too. And so for them to have been out in the international wilderness for so long, I think there was a huge amount of pressure on WADA being applied to get them back in by hook or by crook. And WADA will argue that they have secured some important concessions out of Russia. There has been a form of admission, not the one that was originally intended, over the McLaren report into this scheme. And crucially, when it comes to access to the Moscow lab and the samples and data that are stored within it and the potential for justice to be brought on further cases, there's over 2,000 samples there that the authorities want to look at. WADA say that if Russia doesn't abide by strict conditions and provide this data by the end of the year, then they could be found to be non-compliant once again. Many people feel, however, that that is too much of a softening of their original stance. And it's back to where we started originally anyway, isn't it, with WADA? Travis Tygart joins us now on Sports Day. Thank you very much. Travis, the Chief Executive of the United States Anti-Doping Agency. No fan, I'm guessing, of this decision either. What did you make of it?
Well, as you said in my statement, I mean, it was a devastating blow. I mean, it's a catastrophic outcome for clean athletes and the billions of sports fans who respect and value and want to see the Olympics held to a standard of fair play.
But surely, you know, playing devil's advocate, if you like, if you get Russia back in, you can deal with them more easily. When they're out in the cold, it's very hard to see what they're doing. If you bring the athletes in, if you bring their anti-doping agency back into the fold, you can keep a closer eye on them. It's a good thing for Wada to have done.
Look, we all want every nation in the games, particularly those that are competitive and powerful and influential like Russia, but not at the expense of the Olympic values. And look, it's a trust but verify situation. We trusted them. They cheated like never before. Thousands of positive tests that sit in the Moscow laboratory, corruption of the Olympic Games, World Championships over a period of years, and laughed behind our backs when they got no sanction. We set clear guidelines for what the rules now are for you to come back to participate in the Olympic Games. And all WADA today has said is promised to give us the documents, which is now the second promise, and we'll let you back in. And they obviously haven't fulfilled that condition, and it's been let back in. And certainly while we can play semantics with the admission, an apology, frankly, is what the clean athletes of the world deserve, and a clear acceptance of the past behavior, because we know that's the only way to move forward, is to accept the behavior, acknowledge it, and then do everything possible to correct it going forward. And that just simply hasn't happened.
But Travis, just one thing here. I mean, there is support for this decision. And it's interesting to many of us that the IOC's Athlete Commission themselves issued a statement saying that they perhaps would welcome Russia being welcomed back into the fold. There's some big-name athletes on that commission. They can't all be wrong, can they?
Yeah, listen, I think those affiliated with the IOC and under the IOC's control, they, in the hands of a few at the top of the IOC, this was the outcome. If you remember, after the World Cup this summer, Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, met with Putin. Immediately following, statements were, we're going to do everything to get Russia back in the Olympic world. And that's, of course, what we ultimately want, but not at the expense of the Olympic values. And today we see that come to fruition. And whether it's an IOC-controlled athletes commission that puts out a statement, the millions of athletes around the world that aren't directly controlled by the IOC have spoken the entire different direction. The NATO community, over 37 NATOs from around the world, have said, we want an independent WADA, we want good decisions for clean athletes. And this is just a slap in the face to all those who put clean sport and fair play above sport politics and the influence that money in large countries have within the sport promotion arena.
Travis, Dan Rowan here. What do you think could be the long-term damage done to the credibility and the future of WADA? We've seen this remarkable backlash from athletes and from NADOs. Have they taken a blow to their future credibility, do you think, WADA today?
I think unquestionably, but it's also drawn a clear line, and it's something we've talked about for years. When an IOC executive board member becomes the president of WADA, WADA becomes beholden to the IOC. And this decision today is spot on with that. It's the fox guarding the hen house, and now the world has seen it, athletes have seen it, so it begs the question, what WADA do we want? Do we truly want a global regulator that has teeth to do the right thing on behalf of clean athletes? Or do we want just a puppet that's in the pocket of the IOC and a few at the IOC that want results outcomes based on something other than fair play and principle? And that's the question that's now before us. And I can assure you that's what we're going to work for. There's a void in true independent anti-doping enforcement at the top. And we've got to move towards that effort.
Thank you very much, Travis, for joining Dan and I on Sports Day. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. The Russians, of course, have welcomed this decision, and we should hear from them, and we will hear from them now on Sports Day. Speaking before it was confirmed, Svetlana Zarova, a former speed skater turned politician, said Russia had recognised its mistakes and should be allowed back in.
There is political pressure, exploiting the situation, a general pressure, but there were mistakes made as well, which we've recognised, our president too, and we have fixed them. So I don't understand people who say we shouldn't reinstate USADA. Now is the moment when anti-doping issues are being solved well.
Interesting to hear the Russian point of view, and interesting that the IOC's Athletes Commission kind of welcomed the move by WADA as well. Clearly, though, a lot of opposition. And we were trying to get to the bottom of why WADA had come to this decision. And now we're trying to discuss what might become of WADA. Is there, from what Travis was saying and from what you've been alluding to, WADA's future could possibly in doubt. You could see the breakup of WADA because of this, do you think?
Well, there's so much bad blood right now, I think anything's on the table. But certainly, look, Wada are completely dependent on funding from two camps. One is the IOC and the sports federations, on the one hand, whose interest is in promoting the sports and the commercial power of the sports. And on the other hand, you have governments who provide the other half of funding, and they want to see value for their investment, of course. And those two interests compete and conflict, which is why it's so hard for Wada as an entity, in terms of its governance, to get consensus, and why it's always being pulled this way and the other. So I think in light of this decision, given just how much anger there is out there, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, for example, one of these powerful governments, the American government maybe, said, you know what, we're not going to commit these millions of pounds worth of funding or whatever they pay. I mean, WADA's already underfunded, given the job it has on its hands, we know that. So all it would take is for a few governments to pull out of funding. Maybe the IOC would follow suit and match that, and before you know it, it's a much more diminished force. It's already up against it when it comes to the fight against cheating. Make no mistake, this is not just a Russian problem. We see cheating throughout sport all around the world, in the West as well as in Russia, for example. So I think if that were to happen, there'd be serious questions raised about the future credibility and ability for WADA to really be a global watchdog and a policeman and a guardian for fair and clean sport going forward.
OK, Dan, thank you. Stay with us. Ali Jawad, the British Paralympic powerlifter, is on the line for us now. The UK Athletes Anti-Doping Commission is one of the seats that he sits on. He's one of the athletes on that. He joins us now, as you can see. What did you make of this decision then from WADA today?
Obviously, very disappointed. An organisation that claims to protect clean athletes and the interests of clean sport has failed us. And right now, I'm really struggling to really comprehend the decision today.
Ali, what have other athletes been saying to you? What's the feeling out there?
It's just sheer anger with, one, the compromise, and two, it's the lack of transparency. We don't know how WADA came to this decision, and we just want to know why. Right now there's a lot of anger in the athlete community.
How does it make you feel as an athlete, though? I mean, you've got competition coming up. I know that you train very, very hard indeed.
Thanks.
How does it make you feel, though, to know that that Russian athletes are going to be allowed in, having not met the criteria initially set out by WADA a few years ago?
Well, I think, as clean athletes, we have to, keep fighting for what we believe in. We can't affect WADA's decision. It's happened, and for me, we just have to keep fighting. I think you're going to see a lot of athletes coming together from different nations, and I think there's going to be a collective stand against them, and just to kind of show them that we're not going to stand for this, because right now, what's happened is wrong. It's wrong for us.
OK, Ali Jawad there, British Paralympic powerlifter, joining us. Dan, it strikes me that actually this decision today has got more athletes than normal talking and telling us how they feel publicly. That could have an impact on what happens next as well, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a silver lining in what happened today, therefore, Chris. You're absolutely right. I can't recall a time when British athletes have come together like they have here and mobilised to this extent and voiced their opinion about something. I think that's a healthy thing. I mean, I had the pleasure of speaking to Steph Curry last week, the basketball NBA legend who's been very vocal, as you know, about race relations and women's equality in America. And in the NBA, athletes speaking out is not unusual. It's been less the norm here in British sport. And I think maybe if this is the trigger which encourages athletes more to take a stand, then maybe some good can come of this. Because I think what today's decision reinforced is this sense that when it comes to the crunch, WADA doesn't necessarily, its job isn't to protect athletes. They're not its priority. Politics is the priority. And when sport comes up against real geopolitics, it comes off second best. But maybe the level of this backlash by athletes will make the IOC, make the sports federations just sit up and take notice. But worth bearing in mind, this is a Western outrage. It's not being replicated in many parts of the world. A bit like the FIFA corruption crisis in that way. But eventually, there was progress with FIFA. The sponsors got involved, and I think that'll be the key. Once some of the IOC sponsors start to raise concerns about how this looks, maybe then things will really change.
OK, Dan, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Dan Rowan, our sports editor there, on WADA's decision to